Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have on board as our guest, Ayla Barmmer. And Ayla is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and functional medicine practitioner, which doesn't always, sort of go together, and we'll let her describe that. She earned her degrees at University of Connecticut and a Master's of Science from Boston University. And she has additional training in clinical nutrition, functional medicine, women's health, herbal medicine, and holistic and integrative therapies. Ayla is also a mother, clinician, and speaker and educator. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ayla.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ellen. I'm happy to be on.
And I'll just throw out, and we'll tell people if they want to find out more, we'll also have this posted on our archive, that a good place to find more information on your work is at FullWellFertility.com.
That's right.
Now, since that's what you're calling, actually something that's very important to you as your website and where people find you, that tells us that fertility is a specialty of yours.
It is a specialty of mine, and that developed over years of work and practice where I really started working with couples in the fertility space over the years in my practice, Boston Functional Nutrition. And that was due to a need that I saw in my community. I was being referred a lot of clients who were struggling with fertility issues. And I came to learn, that was really reflective of a much larger need in our country. And ultimately, after working with so many couples and really achieving good success, working with both men and women in practice, I realized that I had empowering information about the profound ways that nutrition and lifestyle can positively influence fertility. And my goal now is to get that out to a much larger audience.
It is definitely one of my favorite populations of individuals to work with. In the years that I was practicing, I actually worked at it was just a conventional fertility clinic in Manhattan on the West Side. And that doctor brought me in because he did not know anything about nutrition because they don't teach that really in medical school. But a couple of his clients who I had worked with had total success. So he called me in and said, could you come work here? And I have to say, it is one of my favorite populations because people looking to get pregnant, that's not the same as somebody like at an end of life scenario or with a serious long-term illness. Usually they're pretty well. They have found a mate. They have a house. They're not homeless. They have a lot going on for them in terms of wanting then to bring a child into their life. But a lot of those people, in the 30s and 40s, they haven't eaten a nutritious thing in their entire life.
Yes. And and what I actually find really exciting about this area of work is that fertility is important for and can be a marker of health in a lot of ways for everyone, regardless of desire to have a baby or not. I also find that if we can think about it as really the ultimate preventative medicine, because if we can influence and really look at what both men and women are doing in that preconception timeframe, so the period before pregnancy, that can have an influence on both the health of the pregnancy and baby's long-term health. And really, this is a multi-generational impact. So to me, I get really excited because I think if we all kind of know better and we can understand some of the key things, which are not particularly difficult, but the key things that we can do in that pre-pregnancy window we can really prevent a lot of the chronic issues that we're seeing today. So I think we're missing a key window of time, and there's an opportunity. So that's what I'm most passionate about, in addition to absolutely helping families grow and couples achieve pregnancies when they were struggling.
So what made you in your personal journey want to be a dietitian to begin with, a RD, which is a big educational commitment?
It is a big educational
And it's
commitment.
not a health coach. I mean, that must really kind of annoy you when people say they're a health coach because they took a weekend course. They're not you.
Right. It does, and I try to focus on, showing the difference in the work that I do, but really it is so important when it comes down to this work to really have that foundational training in biochemistry, anatomy and physiology, and that is what a registered dietitian does have. So while there are things about that more, I call that my conventional training. There are things about that training that absolutely are foundational for me, and I bring into my work. My additional training in functional medicine, which is really about getting to the root cause of issues rather than just addressing symptoms, which they're really, in my opinion, there's no better way to approach fertility than a root cause approach, because fertility really is a symptom of something else going on underneath, which we could get into a bit if you'd like. But yeah, and I will credit becoming a dietitian to really a freshman year nutrition professor I was in a life cycle nutrition class, and she was just phenomenal. And she really opened my eyes to the impact of food as medicine. And she happened to be an herbalist as well. And that's where my love of all things herbs, like yours, really started. And from there, it was a commitment. And I'm very thankful I'm in this space. And I really, truly believe that through nutrition and lifestyle, we can greatly influence our health.
And I love that you have that grounding in conventional studies, which brings you to the registered dietitian. And then I actually think the entire functional medicine perspective is what I will call, especially now, I've been doing it for over 50 years. But at this point, it's actually what should be called good medicine, not alternative, not even functional. It is functional, but it should be what every physician and every dietitian does, because you're looking, like you said, at what might cause whatever the situation is, in this case, infertility.
Right. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I always like to point out that we're all working from the same evidence, right? And the same science-based background, but the lens is really we're looking for that root cause, the underlying issue, so we can influence long-term change, and really get people well, and restore fertility in the case of my work. And so that is, very different from the conventional fertility model, which is really the only option presented to most individuals these days. And I know you mentioned you have direct experience with it, as do I. And this is why I really got into this work, because of the referrals I was getting from conventional fertility clinics who were sending their patients off with one goal, to see a nutritionist to lose weight as quickly and as much as possible, or else their assisted reproductive technology cycles, their IVF cycles would be canceled. And so I just saw, the stress and the emotional, financial, physical toll that was having on, and at the time it was only women who were being referred to me. Men were not even part of the equation. And so I immediately really thought, there's more that we can do here, and this doesn't make sense. At the very least, let's try to help these couples. I wanted to help couples have the best possible chances of a positive outcome from these investments in the conventional fertility model that they were making. But in the best case scenario, we were avoiding that entirely. And I've helped couples do that, where we've been able to restore fertility by taking a functional medicine root cause approach, looking at the whole person, and really providing a foundation of nourishment, which is so important when it comes to fertility.
That's a nice way to put it, a foundation of nourishment, because there you're talking about food, but going beyond that, you talk about sleep, supplements, herbal medicine, actually support. It's amazing how quickly people turn around, I have found. It should be, I'm really committed to this being the first path in fertility. And then, of course, those much more invasive and hugely expensive and, treacherous, where you're taking so many hormones and there's such deadly effects to some of that long term. But it's an option, but it should be kind of a last option instead of a first option.
Absolutely. Because, really, if you're going into fertility treatments and those more aggressive options without addressing the root cause first, then you're setting yourself up for potentially a riskier pregnancy, a much more difficult postpartum recovery. You're setting up, baby potentially for longer term issues, because there's epigenetics involved here. So the expression of, genes through the signaling of environmental factors and what's going on in both mom and dad's bodies, pre-conception and early stages of pregnancy. And so, it's just so important to try to address, even if you ultimately need, fertility treatments, try to address to the best of your ability, the underlying root causes. And again, nourishment's a big piece of it. I always like to describe, for the way I think about fertility is that biologically, we're kind of archaic still, really. Biologically, we're designed to, survive first and procreate second. So the body's going to always look for, okay, where do we need the resources first over reproductive health? And so I like to start by asking that question. Are there enough resources to go around? Is there enough for reproductive health? What else could be funneling or requiring those resources? And by resources, I do in large part mean nutrients, because nutrients are needed by so many systems in our body. And we have a lot more burden on those systems than we ever did.
So when patients come to see you, Ayla, or get in touch with you, and a good place to look is at FullWellFertility.com. Is there another website you like to share as well?
That is where I'm doing the majority of my work right now. And so that's a great place to find us. Yeah.
So do you do additional, let's say, blood testing and assessment of nutrient levels so you know where to start with an individual than would usually be done in conventional practice?
I do. I have a number of tools in my tool belt, depending on what I'm working with the individual, the amount of time I have to work with them, budgets, all of that. So in an ideal scenario, I'm running comprehensive lab work to really understand nutrition status.
Let me say one thing about finances, which is big. But if somebody was planning to actually go the conventional route, we're talking like, close to $40,000 to $50,000. So therefore, a blood test that might cost $200 is probably within a reasonable range.
Absolutely. And that is absolutely a case that I make. And I feel very proud of, the number of times that I've helped, really couples avoid that significant financial investment, which can be a huge burden on couples. But yeah, absolutely. The ideal scenario is to run a comprehensive nutrition assessment that frankly, that is not being done by PCPs, OBs, and that makes sense. It's not really in their scope to be looking really comprehensively at nutrition status. And a handful of nutrients can be assessed just by a very simple blood work, but things like iron, even some of our B vitamins, they are just a simple blood test is not going to be enough to fully assess what your iron status is, what your B vitamin status is, for a number of reasons. And so I do recommend, working with someone who really understands how to do a full nutrition assessment. It can be a game changer for success, for your overall health, for how you approach your diet and lifestyle, because you want to start with good data.
That's so true. I actually get those tests done for myself. And, you get a readback. That's amazing because you can see into things like the Krebs cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have one teeny little thing that's low that no doctor ever looked at that is actually directly related to whatever health challenge, such as fertility or infertility.
Yes, I love and really live for looking at these reports and kind of seeing the patterns that are telling me.
Oh, that must be it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's excellent. But the only thing about that is I really do think this should be standard of practice because, we can also support fertility. Now, do you find a lot of couples are coming to you with they're getting old? I mean, people in their late 40s, it is getting late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for both women and men, there is a point where age absolutely does affect fertility. That's natural. That's by design. We are generally seeing that couples are trying to conceive or looking to start families later and later. That is a piece of the puzzle. But one of the ways that I think about it is less, when it comes to age-related fertility concerns, it's more the cumulative effect of stressors on the body over time, some of which can be mitigated. I mean, for women, there absolutely is a number of eggs that are still viable, egg quality, that all becomes really important. But for both men and women, some of this can be mitigated with the right interventions. And so for fertility, nutrients, as we've mentioned, but antioxidants too are incredibly important, especially as couples are aging or are older, over 35, definitely over 40. We want to see extra antioxidants on board so that both sperm and egg are protected as they are developing, because really the DNA damage that can happen to both developing follicles, egg containing follicles, and sperm are the biggest risk for not being able to conceive, early pregnancy loss, complications in that pregnancy, and longer term epigenetic issues.
Well, I'd like to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and today our guest is registered dietitian Ayla Barmmer, who is also an herbalist and functional medicine practitioner as part of what she does. And we're talking about her focus on fertility, health, and wellness. You can find her at FullWell fertility.com. So you were talking now about specific nutrients, and I know that you can put together certain herbs, they may have them, and other nutrients that really feed into the fertility system.
Yes. So for both men and women, B vitamins are incredibly important. We hear about folate quite a bit with women, but actually it's also really important for men. And I like to talk about some of the nutrients that men need in particular, because I think that men get left out of the equation. We treat, as a culture, we treat fertility, subfertility, infertility as a women's health issue, and it's not. In fact, if we look at the statistics, it's equally both contributing factors, both men and women. And so for men, one nutrient that is exceptionally important is zinc. And men fertility can be supported with quite a bit of zinc. It helps support testosterone levels, sperm motility. So in other words, how well can they swim, so to speak, and get to the egg for fertilization. Also antioxidants like vitamin C, E, and selenium. Selenium is a really interesting nutrient. It kind of turns on almost like a fire hose of antioxidants in the body. And so selenium is really powerful in what it produces for antioxidant activity. Lycopene is really interesting too. That has been shown to improve many aspects of male fertility, including sperm count, viability, quality. And so those are some key nutrients to look for. And I would say for both partners, vitamin D is also very important. We are not living in nomadic tribes anymore. We are not spending as much time outside as we once were. Regardless of your geographical location, we know that vitamin D levels tend to be quite low across the US population and even globally. And vitamin D actually acts a little bit more like a hormone than it does a vitamin, and plays a really critical role in both ovulation, follicle development, overall reproductive hormone development in both women and men. And so that's one that I think is really important to pay particular attention to, and to make sure if you're going to get a vitamin D test that your practitioner is ordering a 25 hydroxy vitamin D and not it's 125 hydroxy 125 vitamin D. It should be 25 hydroxy vitamin D. I see that happen very frequently. So I know I'm getting in the weeds, but I wanted to make that point.
That's okay. We like to go in the weeds.
Okay, good.
An audience who's been focused on nutrition. This show has been on since, I think we started it in 1990. So we have a lot of long-term listeners, and that's excellent that you're sharing, some of the deeper intricacies, because even with something like B vitamins, if someone understands their genetic methylation ability, and I don't know if you do those tests, but I think they're really important, because then if they have some kind of genetic, not their fault, whatever, discrepancies or not full function, then you might not be able to methylate a regular, let's say, B12, or like you said, folic acid. So you would want to use a specific form that is methylated already. So there's so much more intricacies once you're actually looking at that test.
That's true. And I would actually say that avoiding folic acid and looking for the forms that we find naturally in food is wise no matter your genetics. Folic acid is the synthetic form of folate. Synthetic is not always bad, but it does become relevant when we talk about bioavailability. And synthetic folic acid is not as bioavailable for really anyone as we see methylfolate or even folinic acid. Those are methylfolate and folinic acid are the predominant forms of folate that we see in the food supply. That's the forms that I use, definitely in practice, what I recommend, and through FullWell. And so I think that's really important, because no matter your genetics, that it requires conversion by everyone. Some can convert more efficiently than others, but there's always going to be a degree of folic acid that winds up unmetabolized. And so I really get concerned with that when I look at the literature at the effects of unmetabolized folic acid. And that's where I've really gone down in a deep dive on. And
what are the effects?
So it does absolutely, it reduces natural killer cell activity. So we see that there have been links. Of course, we need more data, but links to autism. I did, if it's worth sharing, but I do a lot of teaching along with a colleague of mine, and I know a lot of your listeners like to take these deep dives, and through the Women's Health Nutrition Academy, I did a really comprehensive webinar that gets into the biochemistry of folate, and really proud of that one. And I think if someone really wants to really understand the research and where we are and some of those differences, that might be worth it.
Absolutely. I never heard of that before. So I do this all the time, that the unmetabolized plain vitamin B that is in so many nutrients, when they're just thrown together like a bunch of chemicals instead of clearly thought out like you do in your formulation.
Yes. Yeah. Nutrient metabolism can actually require other nutrients, and so that can be the case when it comes down to methylation, as you mentioned, and that conversion that's required of folic acid into its active form, which is methylfolate. So it just makes good sense to me. I mean, if we think from a common sense perspective, it makes good sense to use the active form in that case.
And when you're dealing with fertility issues, wouldn't you always, if there are partners, and if they're different sex partners, I mean, there's lots of same-sex partners also, trying to have a baby, but maybe then they're using some other means than just natural fertilization. But if we have a man and a woman involved here, isn't it important to check both of their nutritional status?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And in my practice, I over the years got to the point where I required both partners, when there was a male partner, to be involved in working with me, because that really felt like the only way to have the positive impact. I really didn't want women to be making an investment of time, money, and otherwise to work with me when I knew that the male partner had to be part of the equation. And one point that I really like to make, and I feel like I'm shouting it from the rooftops these days, is that, a semen analysis, if men go and actually get that, there's some barriers and steps that have to happen first for it to even get that done. But a semen analysis does not measure everything. It's got limitations. So even if the semen analysis looks okay, even if it looks okay, that doesn't mean that there isn't still a need for intervention. There isn't still a need for preconception health and nutrients. There's not still going to be fertility challenges due to male factors.
And one thing I used always in that particular procedure is something called the dark field microscope. Mm-hmm. And that I did myself, and actually look with the couple at the sperm under the microscope. And right after, you can use it while the sperm is still viable, and you can clearly see how well they're swimming, what the density is, the shape and size of the tails, their efficiency. And that really is a wonderful thing, because it's right there, it's visual and very motivating. Mm-hmm. Because then if they followed a program like what you're discussing, where, of course, eating right, exercising, all those things are part of it, not just taking supplement pills. It's a whole protocol. Mm-hmm. And then you could come back a few months later and see the difference.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, sperm are very sensitive to what's called oxidative stress. They cannot repair their own membranes. Once the damage has occurred, they're damaged. And so it is really important that there's enough nutrients and antioxidants to protect them, and essential fatty acids, which we see in seafood, to really protect sperm as they're developing. Because of that, women's eggs are really interesting because they can actually overcome some damage to sperm, but not entirely. And so that's where that, and sperm develop over about a 3-month period. And so I really love to see couples really focus in on that 3 to maybe 6-month window preconception.
Well, that's so excellent. And thank you so much for being our guest today, Ayla. Obviously, anyone who finds their way to you at FullWellFertility.com will get excellent, grounded information about how to help them on their fertility journey, whether it be a man or a woman, or if a man and a woman is involved, then both, because that's what it takes. And I want to thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you for having me on.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi. Find me at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.